Thank you all for joining. My name is Ben Prohaska, and I am the Executive Director of the Electrification Coalition. Sorry for those initial technology issues. I want to thank everyone for joining today. It's really great to see such an amazing turnout and so much enthusiasm for transportation electrification. I think it's really something that's starting to show up across the country and globally, and this is an exciting moment for us to have this webinar today. I also want to take a quick second to thank thank the speakers for joining us today from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, and the National Association, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. There's a lot of associations there. We really appreciate the work that your organizations have taken to expand charging infrastructure across the country and the leadership that you've demonstrated on these issues. And we are excited to partner with you in the years ahead as we work together to electrify our transportation sector. Next slide. The Electrification Coalition, for those who aren't aware, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advances policies and actions to facilitate the widespread deployment and adoption of electric vehicles in order to reduce the economic, public health, and national security risks caused by America's dependence on oil. So many of us here today, both the speakers and attendees, have been working to advance transportation electrification for many years, even decades. And it is really amazing to have a moment to take a step back and revel in the idea that the technology is ready to meet our everyday transportation demands with electrification. And through efforts like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we actually are going to have the resources and the down payment needed that we've been fighting for so long to be able to actually advance transportation electrification to the point where we can reduce oil's stranglehold on our transportation sector. If you can go to the next slide. To come back to the EC for a second, we work across the country. We have programs that we work, basically working with cities and states across the country to help support transportation electrification across the country. Those include working on efforts like the American Cities Climate Challenge. We work to work with cities and states across the country to advance the policies and actions needed to accelerate transportation electrification. Next slide. To give you some recent examples, this is a great program that we were able to organize with the U.S. Department of Transportation prior to the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and was a great way for us to help demonstrate the technology that I just spoke of and the opportunity with federal investments that we have in front of us. The federal investments have the potential to be catalytic and can accelerate transportation electrification at an unprecedented speed. State and local governments are electrifying their fleets and making investments to advance electrification in their communities. And it's going to be great to see these matching federal investments. It seems like every week, an automaker is announcing a new EV model and opening a new EV manufacturing facility, which just makes all of the aggressive commitments we have and these investments aligning at the right time to change our transportation future. And perhaps even more impressive is that we've gotten to the point in the midst of an unprecedented challenge and uncertainty in the world, and namely a global pandemic that we've all been working to come out of with the impacts of COVID that have turned our lives upside down, and obviously the challenging crisis that exists right now with the terrible war in Ukraine. Next slide. Next slide. So right now, a big part of the framing here is that oil is an international commodity. We're seeing it play out right now with gas prices skyrocketing, with calls to end the use of Russian oil. And unfortunately, it's not something we can drill our way out of. Oil is an international commodity. The price is manipulated by cartels like OPEC, and unfortunately, volatile countries like Russia, who are powering their war machine every single day by the sale of oil. And these countries and these volatile communities often don't share our values. And so amidst these challenges, transportation electrification keeps coming back as the best scalable solution to end the stranglehold that oil has on US transportation. EVs are cleaner, they have better performance, They protect consumers from oil's peaks and valleys, and they also improve the long-term opportunity for the way that we can use domestic resources to power the way that we move. I couldn't be more excited at this point to be with all of you and to think about the idea that we have the wind at our backs and history on our side. And now we have this opportunity across the country to think about how we build a national charging network and accelerate transportation electrification to meet these incredible challenges. So with that, I would like to introduce Chris Bast, our Director of EV Infrastructure Investments for the Electrification Coalition. He leads our organization's work to manage and support federally funded charging infrastructure and EV deployment projects at the state and local level. Prior to joining the EC, Chris served as Deputy Director of the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. He provided strategic communications and policy support for the agency. He and I got the chance to work together while he was at the state, and he worked across the Northam administration to advance a number of comprehensive climate agenda policies, and his work included transportation decarbonization, environmental justice issues, climate policy, and working on carbon markets. So you can obviously see why inviting Chris to join our staff and be a part of helping our response to helping ensure that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law can be deployed and accelerate transportation electrification the way we need to. We're excited to have him join. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and look forward to the rest of the webinar.
All right, thank you, Ben. Thank you for taking that giant picture of my face off of the screen. Let me go ahead and share my screen with everybody here. And we can get going on this part. So as Ben mentioned, my name is Chris Bast. I'm the EC's Director of EV Infrastructure Investments. I joined the EC in January. Did my screen just stop sharing? Are we good?
Yeah, Chris, it was the speaker view, so I'm going to have Marie jump in.
Okay, great. So while she's doing that, I'll just go ahead and get started. As Ben said, I joined the EC in January after working to accelerate transportation electrification with both the Commonwealth of Virginia and then before that, the city of Seattle. And states and cities have been in the driver's seat for EVs for a long time now. But now with great partners in Washington, we have an opportunity to accelerate the transition through legislation, international leadership, business innovation, support for state and local governments. The federal government is engaged in accelerating transportation electrification in a truly unprecedented way. And this moment truly is a catalytic flashpoint opportunity for the United States. And we're at this critical juncture now to secure once and for all an electric transportation future. And of course, the reason we're all here today is because the federal government has made $7.5 billion available in funding to build a truly nationwide network of electric vehicle charging stations. It's critical that these federal resources be allocated well and with good success. Importantly, we at the EC want to help all of you make sure that we turn this $7.5 billion opportunity into much, much more. These resources can have an impact beyond their impressive top-line dollar figure. Federal investments need to be leveraged by additional investment from states and local governments, from the private sector, and the scale of the funding and the pace and scope of executive action here can also open up windows of policy opportunity to move forward on related issues that have otherwise been stalled or unable to advance. So billions of dollars in direct action from the federal government can overcome years of inertia to remove barriers to accelerating installation of EV infrastructure and deployment of electric vehicles. The Electrification Coalition is organizing now to provide support to states and communities by convening, influencing, and engaging governments, businesses, advocates, and other stakeholders to ensure the effective, efficient, and equitable distribution of this funding. And this right here is the kickoff event to our new emphasis to support federal agencies, state and local governments, and communities across the country to maximize federal electrification funding. Through events like this and other webinars this week, direct partnership with states, and through new and existing technical assistance tools and policy resources, we aim to be your strategic partner as we navigate this nationwide deployment. Next slide, please, Marie. So the Electrification Coalition has been doing this work for a long time, as Ben said, and we're a leader in deploying the policies and programs that are vital to our electric transportation future. In addition to an incredible new resource from the Joint Office with their new website, the aptly named driveelectric.gov, we'll also put other links to some of our new and existing resources into the chat. and include them in a follow-up to this webinar that you will get in the days ahead. Briefly, as Ben said, we are a team of implementation and policy experts here at the EC with a number of existing tools and resources that are ready to be brought to bear to support EV infrastructure deployment. In particular, I do want to draw your attention to our recently released EVs in Rural Communities Guidebook. This is a good companion document to the guidance recently issued from the Department of Transportation that states should use as they develop their statewide charging infrastructure plans. We also have a network of over 30 business partners from across the EV ecosystem in our Electrification Coalition Business Council who are ready to support deployment. Next slide. We also have new resources that we're launching this week and in the weeks and months ahead. So in addition to this conversation, we have 2 more webinars this week that you can still register for and join us. Tomorrow is a look at how local governments can be prepared for federal funding. We're pleased on that webinar to once again be joined by our friends at the Joint Office, in addition to some city leaders. And then on Thursday, we're having a conversation with experts who work at the intersection of electricity and transportation planning to dig into some of the challenges, unique solutions for plugging in our transportation network into our electric grid. There's also new content on our website where we're compiling all these resources into an easy to find collection, including some short video clips from EC staff, providing some pro tips about EV charging. A few coming soon things, and then we'll get moving to the rest of the presentations here. Look for a monthly webinar series digging deep into some of these charging infrastructure topics. We'll be identifying the challenges and barriers to deployment, talking about solutions, and exploring unique opportunities to support effective, efficient, and equitable EV infrastructure investment. And we're also really excited for our upcoming workshop on this topic at the ACT Expo in Long Beach. I'm sure many of you will be there. Hope you come by our workshop towards the end of ACT Expo in May. And then also the launch of a new state procurement portal coming soon that will help states procure and deploy charging stations in the most cost-effective way possible. So enough from me. Next slide. I'm going to introduce each of our panelists all at once now, and then turn it over to them to hear more about their work from their perspective. I'm going to do all the intros here and then kick it off with Steve. So first up is Steve Lommele. Steve serves on the transition team for the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. In this role, he is responsible for leading communications and stakeholder engagement, supporting technical assistance and capacity building, and collaborating with internal and external partners on workforce development priorities. Steve joined the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in 2008 and is a project leader in NREL's Center for Integrated Mobility Sciences. Steve is an expert at deploying innovative solutions for advanced transportation projects, including electric mobility. And before joining NREL, Steve worked as an outreach and education field programs manager for the International Mountain Bicycling Association, where he traveled the country and worked with advocates and land managers in 43 states. He holds a master's in environmental policy and management from the University of Denver and a bachelor's in business administration from the University of Colorado at Boulder. So after Steve will be Melissa Savage. Melissa is the program director for environment at the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. In this role, she oversees the Center for Environmental Excellence Programs and Products and supports AASHTO's Committee on Environment and Sustainability, the Committee on Transportation System Security and Resilience, and the Electric Vehicle Intercommittee Working Group. Prior to joining AASHTO, Melissa spent 13 years with the National Conference of State Legislatures as a director in the Environment, Energy, and Transportation Program. She holds a BA in Political Science from Colorado State University and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Colorado. A lot of Colorado higher education reflected in our panel today. Finally, Stephanie Crawford. Stephanie is a senior regulatory manager at the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. And in this role, Stephanie advocates on behalf of cooperatives at the U.S. Department of Energy and on issues regarding power supply, the power marketing administrations, electric vehicles, and other types of distributed energy resources. Prior to joining NRECA, she was an ORISE fellow in the Department of Energy's Office of European and Eurasian Affairs and advised international clients on U.S. energy policy and regulation at a consulting firm in D.C. Stephanie did not go to school in Colorado, but she did earn a Master's of Public Policy degree from the University of Maryland and a Bachelor of Science and Engineering degree from the University of Michigan. And so with that, I will turn it over to Steve and to hear more from the Joint Office. Steve, take it away.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm just pulling up my slides here. All righty. So thanks for that wonderful introduction. Again, I'm Steve Lommele, and I'm on the transition team for the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And so today, I just want to introduce you to the Joint Office as well as kind of what we've been up to, primarily providing technical assistance to states for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program. you'll probably hear this a few times today, but our immediate goal in the Joint Office is to collaborate with states as they develop their state plans for that National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, so that we can ensure that all states are successful in the development and implementation of their plans, and also so that those plans come together to support a national EV charging network. So for some background, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation was established in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to address areas of joint interest between the Departments of Energy and Transportation. We have $300 million to fund the Joint Office over the next 5 years, and we have 9 major areas of emphasis. So as I mentioned, right now, one of our primary areas of emphasis is technical assistance around the build out of a national electric vehicle charging infrastructure network. So specifically with respect to the NEVI program, there's $5 billion for states to build that national electric vehicle charging network along highway corridors. We're hopefully going to be working with states to provide insight, technical assistance to help build a seamless charging network. Paired with that NEVI formula program investment, the Joint Office is also going to be working on the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Discretionary Program. So those are $2.5 billion for community grants for EV charging, as well as supporting some other alternative fuels like hydrogen, natural gas, propane, and fueling infrastructure. We expect there to be more guidance on that around the fall timeframe. And then 2 other areas that tie to the Joint Office efforts are the Low No Emissions Grants Program for transit and the Clean School Bus Program. So that's another $5.6 billion and $5 billion for each of those programs. So a key resource for the NEVI formula program is the guidance document that was published by the Federal Highways Administration back in February. It covers funding features, required state EV infrastructure deployment plans, project eligibility provisions, program administration and technical assistance resources. We have a state plan template on driveelectric.gov that ties to this and accompanies the guidance. And as I mentioned, our immediate priority is just working with states as they digest this guidance to start to put together those state plans. So the guidance document outlines the requirements of the EV charging infrastructure network funded through the NEVI formula program. The expectation and the minimum standards are that EV charging infrastructure will be installed every 50 miles along state portions of the interstate highway system and within 1 mile travel from the interstate. There is a process for working with the Joint Office as states put together their plans to make exceptions to these requirements, kind of based on specific situation on the ground. And again, we're working with states to kind of understand what some of the limitations are and where exceptions might be necessary. Another aspect of the charging infrastructure is a minimum of at least 450 kilowatt DC fast chargers with combined charging system ports that are capable of simultaneously charging 4 EVs. And then for overall station capacity, there's a minimum station power capability at or above 600 kilowatts to support at least 150 kilowatt per port simultaneously across those 4 ports. So kind of as we think about the technical assistance that the Joint Office is providing, we recognize that there's been a lot of work that has happened over the years by folks in the Electrification Coalition and its membership, along with many others in state organizations, NGOs around the country. So we're really collaborating and trying to build on the momentum that exists so that we can create a future where everyone can ride and drive electric. So it's our goal to build that reliable, convenient, equitable national charging network. And we're looking to dive into some of the hard challenges that are coming up as states work to put together their plans to ensure that states are able to kind of build on the successes of their peers, learn from others who have deployed infrastructure in the past, and utilize the people, programs, and relationships that came before us to enable a future of charging experts. So as I mentioned, our primary audience right now is really working with state DOTs. We are providing proactive and reactive support to state DOTs with respect to that 90-day guidance and working to really build capacity within the Joint Office and tap into our partners as state plans come together. So from a proactive standpoint, we have driveelectric.gov, which is the online home of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. the website connects state DOTs and other stakeholders to the technical assistance resources that we have available. We've got the 90-day guidance posted there. We have the state plan template posted there. We have a technical assistance concierge service. So on the contact us page, you can ask us questions, and we've got a team of technical experts that are standing by to engage and answer those questions. And then there's a fair bit of supporting data and tools that will help states as they build out their state plans. Also want to call out our careers page. We've got, I think, 2 opportunities posted right there right now. We're in the process of hiring an executive director for the joint office, and we also have some fellowship opportunities. So I mentioned the technical assistance inquiries that come into the joint office via driveelectric.gov and our email address. We've got a process for receiving questions that come in from states and other stakeholders about the 90-day guidance, about the state plan template, about the exceptions process, all of that sort of stuff. As those requests come in, we're logging them, categorizing them, and we're using that to inform future information and resources that we develop through the joint office to support the build out of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure or National Electric Vehicle Charging Network. And so we're using that to inform future webinars that we're going to be doing, as well as tools and resources that we develop on driveelectric.gov. So we've done 2 webinars already. We had a kickoff of the joint office, and then we did an introductory to some of the technical assistance resources we have available, and we're going to be doing many more webinars sort of as we identify key challenges from states and other stakeholders. We've got upcoming webinars that haven't been announced yet, but that are planned on topics like equity, as well as EV Charging 101 and kind of the alternative fuel corridor designation process through federal highways. On driveelectric.gov, you'll also find some foundational tools for alternative fuel corridor designations. So paired with the NEVI formula program is the round 6 alternative fuel corridor designations. So states are currently designating alternative fuel corridors and electric vehicle charging corridors. And so we've got a lot of tools on driveelectric.gov to support that. We've got tools on understanding equity and Justice 40 requirements. So on driveelectric.gov, you can access this resource that's been developed by Argonne National Laboratory with definition for disadvantaged communities identified across DOE and DOT priorities. There's also screening tool, that sort of thing, to help states as they work to roll out infrastructure that does provide benefit to disadvantaged communities as well. And then we've got reactive technical assistance. So we've been conducting state one-on-one meetings, individual meetings between the joint office and states to provide general assistance as they develop their plans, support with the round 6 alternative fuel corridor designations, and then also provide some clarification. So I mentioned the 90-day guidance that's been published. That's on driveelectric.gov. There will be additional guidance that comes out with respect to the NEVI formula program, the 180-day guidance around May 13th. And so we've been discussing some of the priorities that'll be represented in that information too. So I think we've had conversations with about 27 state DOTs so far, one-on-one conversations, and we've heard from 40 plus states with general questions. But we've been discussing things like the exception process, so exceptions to that 50-mile requirement or 1 mile off the highway, the cost share components and what that looks like. Some states are interested in delegating the development of their plans to consultants or other folks in their state governments, such as state energy offices. Questions around de-designation of corridors and kind of the balancing the strategy between designating new corridors or not. Justice 40 compliance and equity and understanding that. So lots of really great engagement with states so far. And so if you're not a state DOT, if you're a state energy office or another stakeholder, we really do encourage you to engage with your state DOT because they are actively working on these plans to, with respect to the NEVI formula program. And so, if you're looking for opportunities to position your company as a network provider or a site host, states are going to be doing extensive stakeholder engagement as part of their plan development process, and also as part of their implementation process. So again, state DOTs are going to be making decisions about how they invest the NEVI formula program funds in their state plans. And I think that's a good opportunity for stakeholders to engage with states to kind of discuss opportunities of similar interests there. And then within the joint office, we also have extensive analysis capabilities and data. So we're leveraging expertise from national labs and other partners to help states identify roadways where 50 miles may be challenging and explore alternative solutions there, so that we can still build out a national electric vehicle charging network, kind of meeting those minimum expectations in the NEVI formula guidance, but finding innovative ways to get around some of those challenges. So just a quick overview of the key dates. Federal Highways issued that guidance in February, as well as the call for alternative fuel corridor round 6 or request for nominations. The 180 guidance will be coming out around May 13th, and that's when the round 6 nominations are due. And then states will be submitting their plans to the joint office on August 1st, with approval of those state plans by September 30th. And once those plans are approved, the funds are available by the states for investment to deploy EV charging infrastructure through use of the NEVI formula funds. So I assume there'll be many questions, but I want to thank you in advance, and I have put our joint office email address up here. If you have more questions that I'm unable to answer during the Q&A portion today, send them to this email address and we'll get them answered for you. With that, I want to turn it over to Melissa, I think.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. While Melissa is getting ready, just a reminder for everybody, we do have a lot of Q&A coming in, a lot of chat. Please put your questions in the Q&A. We're trying to monitor some of those now, and perhaps if our speakers have easy answers, they can go ahead and type it in the Q&A, and then we'll look and see if we have time to do a few here at the end as well. So, but we are looking at Q&A, not the chat for that. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and put them there. And with that, Melissa, over to you.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I want to thank Chris again for having AASHTO on this webinar, and thank you also for putting this webinar series together. We've been promoting it a bit to our members, and I'm glad that this is a resource for them. So I want to talk to you today about 3 things. 1, AASHTO, who we are, what we do. 2, I want to talk about some of the partnerships that we're working on right now as it relates to implementation around NEVI. And then last, just talk about what we're looking for in the next, 18 to 24 months as we're really getting into implementation. So AASHTO, for those of you unfamiliar, we are the membership association for the 50 state departments of transportation in Puerto Rico and DC. Our mission is really to support the state DOTs in connecting their communities. We provide resources across all modes: air, highways, public transportation, active transportation, rail, and water. As with many associations like AASHTO, we are governed by a committee and council structure, and it is modal, as the modes that I just mentioned, and then also cross-discipline, so professional services for state DOT practitioners. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today is how what we're doing around electrification. About 2 years ago, as we were in the midst of reauthorization for the transportation bill, we recognized that electrification was going to be a big part of whatever bill ended up passing. So we established an EV intercommittee working group, and it is pretty small. We have about 15 members, and it is under our Council on Highways and Streets. But the important part I would mention is that it's representatives from all of the relevant committees and councils within AASHTO's structure. So we have someone from civil rights, funding and finance, environment, sustainability, planning, public transportation, right-of-way and utilities, operations and design, just to name a few. We've added folks as we've kind of gotten into IIJA as it's passed and really dug into some of the details. We have expanded it a bit. They had spent the last few years, again, it was formed in 2020, working on getting folks up to speed on electrification. I've seen in the chat, there were some, questions about who are the point of contacts on NEVI, and certainly the state energy offices have been doing a lot of work on electrification. And so, we know that it's important for our members to get up to speed because this is coming quickly. We have a lot of deadlines that we have to strive towards. The other group that we set up to complement the EV Intercommittee Working Group is an EV Practitioners Working Group. And this is made up of the leads from each state DOT on electrification. Some have more folks that maybe they're working on their plan across verticals within their agency. So we meet monthly, and we basically provide an opportunity for best practices sharing and learning from one another. So what those two groups had been doing right after passage of IIJA is working on AASHTO's response to the two RFIs that came out late last year related to EV implementation of IIJA, the Buy America RFI, and then also just the general deployment of electrification. So those letters are available, the comment letters that we did submit on AASHTO's website, which is transportation.org. And it basically, we provided some input on some of the areas where we saw some challenges that the states might face in the near term around Buy America, and then also in working towards building out their state plans. So that's AASHTO, that's what we've been doing. I also wanted to talk to you about partnerships. One of the things that we've been doing over the last couple of months is working very closely with the National Association of State Energy Officials and the Joint Office. So I was glad to see Steve. And in that work, we had certainly started working with NASIO in 2020 when we first set up the EV Intercommittee Working Group. So our work with NASIO, we've done webinars, we've done some joint activities. But as soon as the bill passed, we recognized a real opportunity to support our members and the NASIO members in working together. Partnerships are going to be key to implementing all of the electrification portions of the IIJA. So recognizing that in some states, our members, the state DOTs, will need to collaborate closely with the state energy offices. And many are already doing that. So there are plenty of examples of regional work where there's state, interstate, intrastate partnerships happening. So to support our members and NASIO's members in working together, AASHTO signed an MOU with NASIO and the Joint Office. And that MOU basically provides the framework around how we're going to convene our two groups. Some of the work that we've already done, I mentioned webinars. We're hoping at some point to have a peer exchange as well to pull both sets of memberships together. And the other thing that we launched not too long ago is a clearinghouse. It's password protected for state agencies only. And on that clearinghouse, state DOTs and state energy offices can upload any documents they found to work successfully for them in past EV work. We're talking about contracts, procurement options. I saw in the chat earlier, someone asked a question about staffing. Is there a need for staffing up? Probably. So we've built this website for our members and for NASIO's members. And I see also thanks, Chris. Yeah, NASIO, National Association of State Energy Officials. So at any rate, we're working closely with the Joint Office as well, promoting the resources that they have. And I know Steve, kind of indicated some of the questions that we're hearing from our members on implementation. And we were fortunate enough a few weeks ago to have a meeting, and we had the Joint Office, Steve was there, and Alex Schroeder, and Federal Highways to basically hear from our members questions that they might have. And some of them had to do with location and spacing. There are some concerns around Buy America requirements that I did mention earlier. But that's, I think, been so helpful to be able to rely on the Joint Office and conveying that, again, to Steve, thank you, for being able to provide that information and help the state DOTs and the state energy offices work closely together. The other thing that I did want to talk about is kind of what are we looking for in the next few months or even 2 years. So as Steve mentioned, the timeline, you can see it's kind of aggressive. We got the guidance, the 90-day guidance in February, which was very helpful. And many of the states are already rolling their sleeves up and getting to work. And we expect the second batch of guidance to come in middle of May. But then the plans are due in August 1st. So that's an accelerated time frame for sure. And I would also say that there are other items of IIJ that the state DOTs are going to be looking at as well. So we're anxious to get the second batch of guidance, and we're excited, I think, that we have the opportunity to get access to, as Steve mentioned, the proactive and the reactive technical assistance, I think has been really helpful so far, as the states kind of plan out how they're going to build their plans and get them in time. And I think being able to rely on that technical assistance is going to be very helpful. So I know I said a lot, but I wanted to thank again Chris and Electrification Coalition for allowing AASHTO to be on today. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do, and I'm excited that we have all these resources available to our members and NASI, of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. And as I said in the chat, similar to how the Joint Office is this great collaboration between the U.S. Departments of Energy and Transportation, this collaboration between the State Energy Office and state energy officials and state transportation officials is just really important. I mean, we have these two unique universes, right, of the energy world and electric grid and energy systems, and then transportation planning and transportation systems. And you can spend decades in one and not touch the other. And now we're bringing these two super complicated systems together. And that's a great segue for more on that over to Stephanie. So Stephanie, take it away.
All right, thanks, Chris. Let me just pull up my slides so you can see them better. Did that go into slideshow? Okay, I assume you can see them. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. EVs, transportation electrification, have been receiving a lot of attention from our members these days, and not just since the infrastructure law, although I would say that particularly in the last few months, it's adding to the momentum there around what co-ops have been doing in terms of incentives and programs that they've been building around EVs for in their service territories over the last few years. So let me just start with a quick overview of who our members are for those who are less familiar with electric cooperatives. So we have 900 members, about 800 of which are distribution cooperatives. So those co-ops are focused on delivering electricity to the consumer members at the end of the line. We also have about 62 members who are G&Ts, who are generation and transmission cooperatives, who either generate and or procure power for the distribution cooperatives that own them. So we have a rather unique business model. And if I go to the next slide, just to highlight that we're also unique in our business model in terms of cooperatives being not-for-profit as well as consumer-owned. That means as we think about new investments, whether it's transportation electrification or anything else, that any new costs assumed by the co-op because of new investments or just price increases, inflation, whatever the case may be, those cost increases are really borne by the consumer members at the end of the line. So this is an important consideration to take into account when you're thinking about how co-ops are looking at new investments that they may be making. It's also important to remember that co-ops serve 92% of the nation's persistent poverty counties. And so that's also very important to us. And when we think about affordability as well as electric reliability being really at the cornerstone of everything that we do. Cooperatives are also not rate regulated for the most part by their state public utility commissions. Rather, that role is served by their democratically elected boards. These are folks elected from the membership in the communities that the co-op serves, and they serve in this quasi-regulatory authority as part of the boards. So this model poses both unique challenges and opportunities. In many ways, co-ops can actually be pretty agile in their decision-making, particularly when a new opportunity is presented to them. There's a clear benefit to the community. And many times they can make a decision faster than what we see in some rate cases, potentially with the state public utility commissions. So it's just something interesting I wanted to note. And going to the next slide, something I wanted to highlight, especially for purposes of today's discussion, is that cooperatives serve 56% of the nation's landmass. We also have 42% of the nation's distribution lines. So when we're talking about a truly nationwide network of chargers to support electric vehicles, as we hear, the Biden administration describing, it's pretty clear that cooperatives can and really need to have a role in making this possible. And not just so in terms of electric reliability, but also because, they're really tied in with their communities. If we want to make sure that not just urban and suburban areas are connected in terms of electric vehicle charging, but also rural communities, and the ability to also for folks to go back and forth, to see national parks, to do tourism, to visit family, whatever the case may be, we really need to make sure that we're building these chargers in rural areas as well. So let me move on to just talk about, cooperatives. We've really been focused around exploring the benefits and challenges and how to overcome those around transportation electrification, what it means for the communities they serve. At NRECA, we're working on resources and tools that can help our members navigate these new opportunities that are created by EVs, and these are going to be unique depending on the community that folks are located in. But I've highlighted on the screen here, co-ops are involved in a number of different initiatives, not only developing different rate structures, both for residential and commercial customers, but also, school bus projects, EV car clubs meant to generate excitement, to drive EV adoption in the areas they serve, and also just building awareness. The third one on the screen along those lines is our podcast, in which our members could hear in general about what's going on in terms of interest in EVs in rural America. We also have an EV funding interest group. These co-ops are meant to coordinate around seeking different federal funding opportunities and other funding opportunities to pursue different grants, whatever the case may be. Some are already receiving funding, and some are new to the game and want to get involved in that space. And we've seen that group really grow quickly in recent weeks. We have already 520 members across the country, encompassing 31 states, that have expressed an interest or are actively working in this space. We've also worked with the other electric sector trade organizations, EEI and APPA, to put out a resource for fleet managers around, preparing to plug in your fleet. What are all the things that you need to do as a fleet customer to talk with your electric utility around areas that you can work together to streamline fleet electrification? So those are just some of the resources, tools, and different ongoing initiatives that we have in place in this space. And I think just to leave some time for Q&A, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts around co-ops. You know, we really are ready and willing partners on EV projects and invested in serving our communities. NRECA is closely coordinating with the joint office to ensure that our members can help support EV charging infrastructure in their territories through both the formula program, and we look forward to that continuing collaboration. But also, I would say we're very interested in the grant program that is that Steve mentioned, and more details are going to come out later this year. I would say that a lot of the focus has been around public charging infrastructure to date, focused on interstate highway corridors, and particularly with regard to the formula program. And we get it, that makes a lot of sense. And we certainly want to be partners on those projects, but we also want to make sure that rural areas that may not sit along those corridors are able to be connected to this wider network. And so that's where we're very hopeful that the grant program, particularly with the focus around community charging, can be an area that can help make sure that's meeting the needs for these other rural communities, and make sure we really see that national network built out. And also, I would just say, finally, that, you know, we want to see flexibility in terms of ownership for charging. We think that it's important that, you know, no one size fits all, whether it's utilities or other stakeholders, they should be able to, you know, own or to lease charging, or, you know, simply stay out of owning and just help with providing the make-ready infrastructure. We want to see all different types of ownership models be supported to really help drive as much of the build out in EV charging as possible. And finally, I would just say, you know, the theme I think around, we've heard throughout today around the importance of coordination and stakeholder outreach. I think, you know, your utility, whether it co-op or other utility, make sure that if you're planning a project, you're talking to your utility from the very beginning. And that can really help with, you know, understanding the capacity available at a site, costs it may take for upgrades, rate design, all types of things. It's best to have those conversations early. So I will leave it there and just say thank you and happy to take questions. And here's my contact information if you'd like to contact me afterward. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. If Steve and Melissa can come back on, we've got a few questions and we've got about 10 minutes here. We're perfectly on time for some Q&A. Again, also major thanks to Steve for going hard here in the Q&A chat box, answering your questions there. So continue to put those in, and if we don't get to some of them in the next few minutes, we'll see what we can get answers to and send out those answers afterwards. The first question that I want to pull out here has come up a few times, and would love to get y'all's perspective on it, and that's around state capacity. You know, somebody mentioned that states are often asked to do lots of things from the federal government, but given programmatic, you know, money to implement the things, but maybe not enough resources to have the capacity to really drive it forward with personnel and other types of capacity building resources. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, and related to that, there was some additional conversation around, like, look, there are some states that have been leaders on electric transportation now for a decade or more. And, you know, those states may have existing expertise that they are more easily able to bring to bear. But there are other states who are just now, for the first time, thinking about a statewide charging network, or understanding what, you know, electric vehicles are and how they influence their whole state. So in what ways are you at the Joint Office and maybe at AASHTO thinking about providing support to states in general on the capacity side, and in particular to those states that haven't had as much experience in this topic?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, with the NEVI formula program, states can use the funding to support plan development. The Joint Office, of course, is here to provide technical assistance. And I think there are some questions in the chat about what kinds of technical assistance we can provide. And I mean, it's with respect to the state plan development and implementation, we can cover just about anything that states are going to come up with. So there's ample resources within the Joint Office and through partners like AASHTO to support peer-to-peer exchanges between states, to conduct analysis, to answer questions. So I think we've got a fair bit of capability within the Joint Office to address some of those concerns where there might not be expertise at the or staffing at the state level to address some of those questions.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Steve just said about being able to tap into the funding to pay for the planning work that's going on right now. And Chris, to your point about, many states have been doing or have been working on these issues for decades, and they're really great to have around. And so we've been fortunate in our EV practitioners working group, which again is made up of as many of the electrification leads as we can get or identify within the state DOTs. And so we're able to bring those folks together with their peers that have been doing this for a long time. And I would also say that, we are looking forward to helping kind of expand capacity where we can as partners with the Joint Office and definitely with NASIO. And I've seen in the chat, what about the other state agencies or the other sister agencies that are going to be impacted by this, and the utilities as well? I mean, and those are definitely future partnerships, and even partnerships that are happening right now. We may have this formal agreement with NASIO and the Joint Office, but we and our members know, those that have been doing it for a long time, understand 100% that successful partnerships will be what helps get us through the planning process and into implementation.
Totally, and I get to speak my experience working at a state environmental agency. In Virginia, we were the ones charged with implementing the Volkswagen settlement mitigation funds, right? And so the electric vehicle deployment expertise was housed at the environmental agency, and we had to, we've done a lot of work in Virginia with our DOT to share that knowledge, and I'm sure that's going to be happening in states across the country as well. Stephanie, question for you came in, really appreciated the presentation about rural electric cooperatives, but just thinking about electric cooperatives in general, and not just, some of the strong, really great benefits and features of a co-op can also be seen in some municipal electric utilities and some public utility districts, and different ways utilities are structured across the country. And a question came in about communities in urban and suburban settings are ideal recipients of those types of benefits that can be offered by more nonprofit electric service providers. And so wondering if you can speak, to any of the collaboration opportunities, across the utility spectrum there, to try and drive those benefits to those places as well.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in my presentation, there's a lot of commonalities amongst the utilities, certainly in terms of how we look at the interconnection process, how fleet managers, as I mentioned, can work with their utilities, lessons learned there that we've tried to share. And we work with, as NRECA, as the national trade, we work with the Edison Electric Institute for the investor-owned utilities and American Public Power Association for the municipal utilities around common resources when it makes sense. And on the fleet manager side, that was one in recent years that made a lot of sense to us. So I think that's an area, and we certainly, coordinate, we're all coordinating with the Joint Office so that we can make sure that there is that, there's not a disruption, whether when we're looking at a corridor and all that, as there's different utilities. So I would say that coordination is definitely going on.
Great, thank you. A few questions have come in about medium and heavy duty vehicles and this charging network. I was wondering if you all could speak a little bit to, the idea around different classes of vehicles and the need for electric charging infrastructure across classes, and whether or not you foresee the NEVI funding and the different, the NEVI funding being able to support that, and then the different ways that perhaps some of the other infrastructure dollars available, or the dollars available in infrastructure law, can help support medium and heavy duty electrification as well.
Yeah, I might just note that in the NEVI formula program guidance, EVs are specifically called out as light duty passenger vehicles. There is, I put this in the question and answer, but there, once corridors are fully built out, there is an opportunity for states to use some of that funding to support infrastructure for charging that's available to 2 or more commercial vehicle operators. So I think the near-term vision is, of course, to support a charging network for light-duty passenger vehicles, but states are considering how they can future-proof their investments so that they could potentially be expanded to support medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles in the future, and also engage with freight operators to understand where there are freight corridors that could be good candidates for that future-proofing.
Yeah, and I would add that that's a great question. And when we were working on the AASHTO comments for the RFI on deployment of NEVI, that was one of the items that we raised. And to Steve's point about this idea of future proofing. And so the states were really interested in looking at ways, how, as they're building their plans, can they be thinking about that medium and heavy duty, folding those in at some point. So I think, as Steve mentioned, that is on their mind, and I think that as they build out where they need to go, then they frees up some money for potentially doing some work in the medium and heavy duty.
Great. We have time for one last question, and this might just be for Steve here. The formula funding guidance speaks to the important parts of sort of priority 1 is completing the build out of the alternative fuel corridors. Can you speak a little bit to the process? What's the process for state DOTs once they think that they've got that built out or are seeking exceptions to that? How do states act on that?
Well, I mean, a corridor will be fully built out when it meets the minimum standards that are defined in the 90-day guidance. And so there will be cases for exceptions. And in the Joint Office, we've been working with states to kind of understand where there are specific challenges. For example, maybe there's a rural area where there's just nothing for 62 miles and the minimum requirement is 50. We need to understand kind of what that challenge looks like. Are there any potential solutions? And if not, is an exception warranted? So there is an exception process, and we are working with states to understand the specific challenges where they think they may need an exception and kind of how that plays out.
Awesome. That question of how do we get power the places we need it for high-powered fast charging, just to plug a future webinar. We're talking about that on Thursday. So if anybody has any interest at that intersection, don't forget to join us then. I think that's it. I'll provide another opportunity for any of the panelists for any closing remarks, and we can go ahead and say thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time today, Chris. And it's great to be here with Stephanie and Melissa. And we all look forward to working together to help all of you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you everybody for joining us and the EC team for putting this together. We really appreciate it, and join us throughout this week and in the weeks and months ahead as we're continuing to work with all of you to help make this deployment effective, efficient, equitable, and transition our transportation economy. So thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.